Ever walked away from a conversation smiling on the outside, but burning on the inside? They say words can't hurt you. But why does one sarcastic comment echo in your head for days? You're not weak. So why do some people treat you like you're easy to knock down? Your dignity, it's not just your right. It's your responsibility to protect. But here's the hard truth, some people make challenging your dignity their full-time hobby. And you've probably met them. They're the ones who slide a mocking remark into a family dinner. Who drop a passive-aggressive jab in front of your boss. Who wrap cruelty in a joke that somehow makes you feel 2 inches tall. And when it happens, there's that moment of silence. A flash of heat in your chest. You laugh it off. Smile like it's nothing. But inside, something twists. You find yourself asking, why me? Do I give off some invisible signal that says I'm the office doormat? Let's get this straight, you're not the problem. They are. And today, we're going to break down exactly why they act this way. Not just one reason, 6. 6 psychological truths behind why certain people go out of their way to push your boundaries. More importantly, I'll show you how to handle it with the quiet strength of Stoicism. Yes, that ancient philosophy from men in robes, still razor sharp today. No screaming matches. No elaborate revenge. As tempting as those may be, the real power lies elsewhere. In calm. In clarity. In the unshakable respect you build from the inside out. So, if you're done biting your tongue, if you're ready to carry yourself with strength, without ever raising your voice, then comment, yes, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and let's begin. Reason 1, they sense weakness. Some people test boundaries the way predators test for prey. They don't shout their intentions. They observe. They wait. And the moment they detect uncertainty, hesitation in your voice, doubt in your eyes, they strike. Not with fists, but with words. Words that seem harmless to everyone else, but hit you right where you're most vulnerable. It could be a throwaway comment. It could be a funny line that cuts far deeper than you're willing to admit. But if you let it slide, if you keep your silence and play it cool, they take that as permission. Permission to go further next time. To dig a little deeper. They rarely stop on their own. They stop when you break the image they've built of you. When you calmly, but clearly, show them you're not the person they thought you were. I'll never forget a moment early in my career. I worked under a manager whose tongue was sharp, not clever sharp, cruel sharp. He had a gift for sniffing out insecurities and pressing on them like bruises you thought you'd hidden well. In meetings, he'd toss out lines like, maybe this is a bit too advanced for you, or, we'll let you catch up later, always delivered with that smug little smirk. Everyone chuckled. So I did too. I laughed it off, told myself not to take it personally. But I did. Every time I stayed quiet, the jabs cut a little deeper. And every time I let it go, he pushed further. Because silence, to people like that, isn't peace. It's permission. And that brings us to something even more important. Because the way you respond, leads us straight into reason 2. Let's talk about that. Sometimes, the silence you give them is mistaken for permission. And that's exactly what we just saw, when you don't push back, you're training them to keep going. That's the bitter truth we ended on. Now let's dig deeper. Because people like this, they're not reckless. They're calculated. They're watching. Measuring. Testing how far they can go with you. And every time you let disrespect slide, you teach them one thing, this is acceptable. You don't have to say it out loud, your silence says it for you. This is where Stoicism becomes your greatest ally. Not the cold, emotionless robot people often imagine. That's a myth. Real Stoicism isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about knowing exactly what you do care about, and protecting it with clarity and strength. As Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, once said. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. You can't control whether someone decides to mock you. You can't stop them from trying to embarrass you. But you can decide how much control they get over your inner world. You can choose whether their words stick to you or slide right off. And here's a truth most people won't say out loud, maybe because it stings a little. If you don't respect yourself, no one else will. If you allow people to belittle you without consequence, it doesn't mean you deserve it, but it does mean you've taught them you'll tolerate it. Humans are wired to navigate social hierarchies. We all do it, even when we don't realize it. Some people push, not out of hatred, but curiosity. Where is your line? If they can't find it, they'll keep going, assuming you don't have one. It's not always cruel. Sometimes, it's just opportunistic. And they'll take as much as you're willing to give, until you decide enough is enough. That's the turning point. That's what I had to learn, and what I want you to remember. Standing up for yourself doesn't always mean confrontation. It doesn't mean raising your voice, slamming your hand on the table, or getting into a heated argument. Sometimes, real power looks like this. A steady, unblinking look when someone tries to make you the punchline. Choosing not to fake a laugh at a joke meant to put you down. Getting up and leaving a room where your worth isn't recognized, without flinching, without explaining, and without guilt. That is Stoic strength. Not because it's cold, but because it's controlled. You're not suppressing emotion, you're channeling it. You're choosing to act with dignity, not impulse. And something amazing happens when you make that choice. People feel it. The ones who once poked and prodded you for weakness, they pause. They look for someone else. Because suddenly, you're not an easy target anymore. You don't owe them a performance. You don't owe them an explanation. You owe yourself protection. That's it. And the second you start holding that boundary, something shifts. Here's the part most people miss. The deepest respect you earn isn't from others, it's from yourself. When you act with integrity and quiet strength, you begin to trust yourself. You believe in your ability to protect your peace. To defend your value. To walk away from what no longer serves you. And just when you begin to feel that shift, another challenge appears. Because not everyone backs off. Some push harder. And that leads us into reason 2. So what happens when you start respecting yourself? You begin to trust yourself. Not because the world gets easier, but because you become stronger. Not by controlling everything around you, but by mastering the one thing you always own, your response. That's the heart of Stoicism. It doesn't offer you a hiding place. It gives you armor. Not the kind that disconnects you from life, but the kind that lets you walk through it, upright, unshaken, and dignified. Now let's move to reason 2, they want control. Humiliation has been used as a tool of control for thousands of years. Sometimes it's subtle, a carefully placed dig masked as a joke. Other times, it's loud and cutting, designed to slice straight through your confidence. But the motive is always the same, to shrink you down so they can feel taller. Think about it, when someone throws out a degrading comment in front of others, or exposes something deeply personal that was never theirs to share, what are they really doing? They're reaching for your voice. Your presence. Your dignity. They want to steal just enough of it to feel powerful in comparison. But here's what most people never realize. The ones who try to humiliate others are usually carrying deep cracks within themselves. They feel powerless in some part of their own life, and instead of confronting that pain, they project it outward. They mask it with cruelty, reaching for the quickest way to feel big, by making someone else feel small. I remember a colleague like that. She had a talent for putting people in their place, with a smirk, a quip, or just the right jab delivered at just the wrong moment. She'd laugh afterward, like that somehow made it okay. There was one moment that stuck with me. We were in a team meeting. I had just finished presenting an idea I'd spent weeks developing. Before I could even finish my sentence, she cut in with a sarcastic remark. The room tensed. A few people chuckled, but it was the uncomfortable kind, the "we don't know how to react" kind. It wasn't just what she said. It was how perfectly timed it was, engineered to throw me off balance, to make me second-guess everything I had just shared. And for a moment, it worked. I felt my face flush. I felt the surge of frustration, the urge to defend myself. To argue. To prove that my idea had value. That I had value. But I didn't. Something inside me, maybe instinct, maybe wisdom hard-earned, stopped me. Because I realized. The worst thing I could do was play her game. Her power wasn't in the insult itself. It was in how I chose to respond. It was in whether I believed the lie hidden in her words, that I didn't belong. That's where Stoicism speaks loudest. Marcus Aurelius reminded us. You have power over your mind, not outside events. You can't stop someone from trying to humiliate you. They may do it in front of a crowd, or whisper behind your back. But here's the truth, they only win if you let their words shape how you see yourself. They only win if you hand them control of your mind. And once you stop believing their version of who you are, once you reclaim the narrative, their power disappears like smoke in the wind. So, what happens when you no longer react the way they expect? What happens when you face humiliation not with anger, but with stillness? That's where we go next, with reason 3. When someone refuses to see themselves as inferior, humiliation loses its power. Not because they shout back. Not because they win the argument or deliver the perfect comeback. But because they're rooted. They know exactly who they are, and that kind of clarity can't be shaken by noise. You can't tear down someone who's built their sense of worth from within. You can't humiliate someone who doesn't need applause to know they're valuable. They don't crumble under judgment because their identity isn't built on sand, it's built on stone. So if you take just one thing from this part of the message, let it be this. Humiliation only works when you let someone convince you that you deserve it. You don't. And you never did. The people who try to shame or embarrass you are telling you everything about themselves. But how you respond, that reveals everything about you. Will you mirror their pettiness, or will you stand grounded in clarity? Choose dignity instead of defensiveness. Choose mastery instead of reaction. Choose stillness instead of struggle. And something unexpected happens, they lose interest. Because you are not prey. You are not small. You are not someone who can be broken by words or controlled through shame. You are someone who cannot be controlled, because you control yourself. That is the true power Stoicism offers. Not an emotional shield that numbs you to pain, but a mindset so clear, so centered, that harsh words pass right through. Like wind through open hands, there's nothing to grab, nothing to bruise, nothing to hold on to, unless you give them weight. And now, it's time we address reason 3, they envy you. This may be the hardest truth to face, but you need to hear it. Sometimes people try to tear you down not because you are flawed, but because they are. Not because you're failing, but because you remind them of everything they've stopped striving for. Your character, your calm, your quiet strength, these things unsettle people who gave up on those values long ago. When you carry yourself with self-respect, when you speak with confidence but without arrogance. When you choose principle over popularity. You don't just walk into a room. You reflect something back at them, something they're trying hard not to see. And instead of rising to meet that reflection, they take the easier road, they try to break the mirror. They don't challenge your ideas to sharpen them. They don't offer critique to help you grow. They lash out, not to correct you, but to silence the reminder of what they once aimed for, and abandoned. Psychologists have a name for this emotion, malicious envy. It's not the fleeting envy we all feel from time to time when someone else succeeds. This version is darker. More corrosive. Studies in emotional psychology reveal that malicious envy often triggers something called schadenfreude, the disturbing satisfaction some people feel when someone they resent stumbles or fails. Not because they gain anything from your fall, but because they couldn't handle your rise. So what do you do when that energy is aimed at you? That's exactly where we're heading next, in Reason 4. Sometimes, your very presence unsettles people, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your strength reminds them of what they lack. Your achievements, your calm confidence, your refusal to lower yourself, these things act like a mirror. And when people don't like what they see reflected back at them, they don't admit it. They don't say, "Your success makes me uncomfortable." Instead, they chip away at you, quietly, subtly, publicly. They belittle you. They undermine you. They try to humiliate you, not because they think you're weak, but precisely because they know you're not. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, understood this deeply. He wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." You see, a person can have everything, wealth, position, followers, and still live in emotional poverty, because their soul is starved for peace. And that hunger doesn't go away on its own. So they lash out. They strike at others, not because they're cruel by nature, but because they're desperate to silence the discomfort within themselves. They humiliate what they secretly admire. They mock the light they wish they had, because it's easier to dim someone else than to find a spark of their own. But once you understand this, once this truth settles into your bones, something inside you changes. The shame you used to carry in those moments, it begins to dissolve. You stop wondering if you're the problem. You stop holding their bitterness like it's your burden to bear. And instead of anger, you might even feel pity. Not in a smug, superior way, but with clear, grounded compassion. Because they're fighting battles you didn't start, and you were never meant to finish. That's what Stoicism teaches. We can't control what others do. We can only control the meaning we give to it. So when someone tries to cut you down out of envy, don't shrink. Don't contort yourself to make them comfortable. Don't dim your light to soothe their shadows. Stand your ground. Stay where you are. Because their discomfort is not your responsibility. It never was. And if this message resonated with you, if it reminded you of your worth, let me know in the comments by typing "yes." I read what you share, and your voice matters here. Now let's move forward. Because not every act of disrespect comes from envy. Sometimes, it happens simply because you haven't drawn a clear line. That's reason 4, you haven't set boundaries. If you don't make it absolutely clear what you will, and will not, accept, people will test you. And often, it's not out of malice. Not at first. It's human nature. We push limits. We explore edges. Sometimes consciously. Sometimes without even realizing it. But always with the same question behind it, where is your line? And if they don't find one, they assume there isn't one. So they push a little. A joke at your expense here. A dismissive comment there. You stay quiet, thinking it's not worth the confrontation. You let it slide. You smile politely. You tell yourself, it's just easier this way. But little by little, they take up more space in your life. Your silence becomes their green light. And one day, you look around and realize. You're standing in a space that no longer feels like yours. The rules have changed, and not in your favor. What you once thought was obvious. That you deserve respect. That your time matters. That your feelings have weight. Those unspoken truths have been replaced by silence. But boundaries, once established, can be rebuilt. And in the next part, we'll explore exactly how to do that. By the time the disrespect becomes routine, it feels almost invisible. You sit there, wondering, how did it get this far? But deep down, if you're being completely honest, you already know the answer. It started the very first time you chose not to say, enough. That's why the Stoic philosopher Epictetus gave us this sobering reminder. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. It sounds harsh, almost insulting at first. But dig deeper, and it speaks a truth that many people spend their whole lives avoiding. Setting boundaries comes at a cost. People might not understand you. They might call you difficult, cold, arrogant. Especially those who benefited the most from your silence. But here's the thing. If you want peace, you won't always get approval. And if you're chasing approval, peace will always be just out of reach. You cannot pursue both at the same time. Stoicism reminds us that peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of discipline. It's the clarity of knowing where you stand, and the quiet courage to stay rooted, even if it means standing there alone. Let's take a real example. Look at Oprah Winfrey, early in her career. Back when she was just a young reporter working at a TV station in Baltimore, she was told, repeatedly, that she wasn't cut out for television. They criticized everything. Her weight. Her voice. Her presence. They told her she didn't fit the mold. There was pressure from every side. Pressure to conform. To adjust herself to meet their expectations of what was acceptable. And it would have been easy to give in. To reshape her voice. Her look. Her essence, just to please the people in charge. But she didn't. Instead, she drew a line. She made a decision not to betray herself in exchange for approval. She refused to trade authenticity for acceptance. Eventually, she was fired. To some, that would have been the end, a sign that maybe her critics were right. But not for Oprah. She understood exactly what Epictetus meant. Sometimes, you have to be willing to look foolish in the short term, to stay true to your values in the long term. You have to be ready to be misunderstood. To risk rejection. Because the alternative is far worse, living a life shaped by other people's comfort zones. And we all know how her story turned out. She went on to build an empire. A legacy rooted not in compromise, but in authenticity, empathy, and unshakable self-respect. She didn't fit the mold. She redefined it. That is Stoicism in action. You don't set boundaries to make people like you. You set them because you finally understand your worth. And when you do, when you calmly, consistently, and firmly protect those lines, people have two choices. They either rise to meet them, or they walk away. Either way, you win. Either way, the result is peace. But let's not sugarcoat it. This kind of strength isn't easy. It means being willing to disappoint people who only respected you when you were silent. It means being called difficult by those who only understood relationships built on sacrifice. But on the other side of that discomfort is clarity. And that brings us to reason 5, where we uncover the true cost of staying silent for too long. When you finally set boundaries, something profound happens. You may stand more alone, but not because you're wrong. Because you're strong. And that solitude, rather than weakening you, becomes a source of clarity. You're no longer seeking to be liked. You're choosing to be aligned. True dignity often walks hand in hand with solitude. But it is not the kind of solitude that makes you shrink, it's the kind that makes you solid. And when self-respect becomes your foundation, the world responds. The ones who remain. They know exactly where the line is. And those who walk away. They were never meant to stay. Reason 5, they seek an audience. Humiliation rarely happens in private. Why? Because humiliation craves attention. It feeds on witnesses. The weak often gather a crowd, not for support, but as silent accomplices to their cruelty. They need others watching. They need the performance. Because without it, their power feels hollow, like shouting into an empty room. You've seen it before, haven't you? Maybe it was in a boardroom, when someone in a position of authority tore into a colleague, not because of a mistake, but as a flex. A reminder of who held control. Or maybe it was years ago, in school. A group turned on a quiet kid, not because he did anything wrong, but because he stood alone. Not weak, just isolated. And to a bully, that's all it takes. Because that's how bullies operate. They don't go after the strongest. They don't always pick the easiest targets either. They choose the unprotected. The ones without a safety net. The ones standing alone, hoping no one notices. And the crowd? The crowd makes it worse. Here's a difficult truth. People in groups are easier to control. Psychologists have a name for this: de-individuation. It's when individuals lose their sense of responsibility inside a crowd. They follow along. They laugh, even when something inside them says, "This isn't right." They stay silent, even when their gut says, "Speak up." Why? Because the fear of becoming the next target is louder than their conscience. The person leading the humiliation knows this. They depend on it. Their cruelty is not random, it's calculated. It's a performance, where someone else's shame becomes the show, and the audience. Too afraid to walk out. But don't be fooled. What looks like dominance is often just desperation in disguise. Because someone who needs a crowd to validate their cruelty is not powerful. They are exposed. They're showing you, without even realizing it, that they cannot stand on their own. Now contrast that with a real example of strength. Think of Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome. One of the most powerful men in history. Surrounded by generals, senators, servants, all bowing in his presence. He had every opportunity to flaunt his power, to dominate others with ease. But he didn't. Marcus Aurelius was known for his humility, his restraint, and his commitment to reason over ego. He didn't need to humiliate anyone to prove his worth. He didn't crave applause to affirm his status. In fact, he often reminded himself that the opinions of the crowd meant nothing, especially if they came from those who lacked wisdom and understanding. And that's the lesson. True power doesn't humiliate. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't rally others to shame someone into silence. It stands alone if it must. And it stays grounded in truth. So what does that look like in the real world? How do you hold your ground when the crowd turns? That's what we'll explore next, in Reason 6. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." He understood something most people never learn, even in a lifetime. The approval of the crowd is often hollow. It's not rooted in wisdom. It's driven by fear. By habit. By the desire to blend in rather than stand out. True strength doesn't need an audience. It doesn't require cheers or validation. It doesn't tremble without applause. And that brings us to a crucial truth. When someone tries to humiliate you in public, their most powerful weapon isn't their words. It's the reaction of the crowd. They want you to feel isolated. They want the silence of others, or worse, their laughter, to convince you that you've lost. But let's be clear. That laughter. It's not confidence. That silence. It's not agreement. They're symptoms of fear. You owe them nothing. Not your defense. Not your dignity. Not even a sliver of your peace. The Stoic path teaches something rare in today's world. To stand tall even when surrounded by people who shrink in fear. To walk alone rather than follow those who've lost their way. To see through the illusion, that people who need an audience to feel powerful are never as powerful as they pretend to be. And you? You don't need an audience at all. You don't need the approval of the loudest voice in the room. You don't need applause to know your value. What you need is your own still mind. Your own unwavering clarity about what's right. And the discipline to remain upright, especially when everything around you pushes you to bend. That is Stoicism. That is where real power lies. Not in fame. Not in fear. But in the quiet, unshakable dignity of someone who refuses to be made small by the noise of the crowd. And if this message struck a chord with you, if you felt something shift inside you, click that like button. And subscribe, because every time I uncover a new truth, I want you to be the first to hear it. Now, let's finish strong. Reason 6, they sense you don't know your own worth. This is the most painful reason of all. Because it doesn't start with others. It starts with you. For many people, the first time they were humiliated wasn't because they were weak. It was because they hadn't yet discovered how strong they actually were. And those who seek to humiliate, they sense it. Like predators testing prey, they don't go after the loud or the boastful. They target those who are still unsure. Still forming. Still learning what they deserve. And here's the truth. It's not a physical weakness. Not a lack of intelligence. It's the vulnerability of someone who hasn't yet fully owned their own worth. Because if you knew, truly knew, who you were. If you were rooted in it. Then no insult, no joke, no dismissal would land. Not because people wouldn't try. But because their words would hit something solid inside you. A core that cannot be shaken. But without that self-knowledge, you become dependent on the reactions of others. Their approval lifts you. Their rejection crushes you. And that's where the real danger lies. So how do you reclaim that worth? How do you become someone no longer vulnerable to every opinion that floats your way? That's what we'll uncover in our final reflection, the key to building the kind of self-worth that doesn't flinch. When you don't know where you stand, you bend with every breeze. You shift with every comment. You react to every glance, every tone, every word, because deep down, you haven't yet decided who you are. Epictetus put it simply, yet powerfully. No man is free who is not master of himself. That's one of those truths worth reading, twice. Most people believe freedom comes from external things. Money. Status. Approval. Reputation. But real freedom doesn't begin on the outside. It begins with self-mastery. And self-mastery starts with this, knowing who you are. Because when you don't, the world becomes dangerous. Every opinion feels like a threat. Every insult feels like truth. Every silence feels like rejection. But when you do know yourself, deeply and fully, something remarkable happens. You become untouchable. Not because you're arrogant. Not because you're aggressive. But because you've developed a quiet, immovable certainty about your worth. Take Eleanor Roosevelt, for example. As a young girl, she was painfully shy. She grew up in a world of extreme contrasts, wealth and influence on one side, pain and rejection on the other. Her mother mocked her looks, calling her "Granny," because she didn't meet society's standard of beauty. She lost both parents before she reached her teenage years and was raised by a family that made sure she never forgot how little they thought of her. Most people in her position would have disappeared into the background. Let the world define them. Carried those wounds for a lifetime. But Eleanor chose differently. Step by step, through learning, through reflection, through purpose, she began to build something few people ever do. A sense of self so strong, so clear, that no one could take it away. And when she became First Lady of the United States, the criticism didn't stop, it intensified. People picked apart her appearance. Attacked her beliefs. Mocked her activism. Dismissed her efforts to change what they believed should stay the same. But the difference was, she had already done the work. The hard, internal work of deciding who she was. So their insults. They didn't land. The humiliation bounced off a foundation that had already been fortified. She fought for justice. For equality. For human dignity. Not because it was popular. but because she knew, deep in her bones, what was right. And that's the ultimate teaching of Stoicism. No one can humiliate you without your consent. Freedom, as Epictetus taught, is not freedom from criticism. It's not freedom from mockery or misunderstanding. It's the freedom to decide what those things mean, and whether they mean anything at all. You don't earn that kind of freedom by arguing back at every insult. You don't achieve it by silencing every voice of doubt. You earn it by refusing to give those voices power over your identity. When you know who you are, insults become background noise. Jokes lose their sting. Even praise stops holding sway, because your self-respect isn't a reflection of others. It's a light that comes from within. And once you build that light, no one can take it from you. Let's be honest, this path isn't easy. It takes real effort. It takes hours, days, sometimes years of honest reflection. Of sitting with yourself. Of asking the hard questions. Who am I, really? What do I stand for? What am I no longer willing to tolerate? It takes the courage to stand alone in rooms where no one else seems to understand. To hold your line when it's easier to blend in. To stay true to your core, even when your voice shakes. But there is no shortcut to real freedom. You can't beg people to respect you. You can't bargain for dignity. You must claim it. Quietly. Clearly. Without needing anyone's permission. And when you do, when you truly decide to own your worth, something profound begins to shift. The same people who once tried to humiliate you. They lose interest. Their words fall flat. Their attempts to belittle you don't land. Because there's no soft spot left for their cruelty to grip onto. You become, in the truest sense, untouchable. Not because the world suddenly got kinder. But because you got stronger. So here's the truth. Some people will try to humiliate you. Some will test your limits. Some will envy the light you carry. And a few? They'll do it simply because your presence reminds them of what they've given up. But here's the good news. You are not here to dim yourself for anyone. Not anymore. You're not someone who pleads for respect. You command it, calmly, quietly, and, if necessary, alone. That's the Stoic way. When you stand your ground. When you stop believing the lies meant to make you small. When you decide, truly decide, that you are enough. Something powerful happens. You become untouchable. Not because life gets easier. But because you've built the strength to rise above it. So if you're ready to walk this path. To carry that quiet power. To live above the noise. I invite you to walk it with me. Hit subscribe. Tap the bell. Join a growing community that's learning to rise. With strength. With self-respect. With stillness. Because the world will never hand you dignity. It's something you give to yourself. And once you do, no one can ever take it away. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.